everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mindset Over Matter. I'm your host, Gabby Gooding, and today I'd like to explore a question that's been on my mind over the last couple of weeks. And that question is, why is it that we want the things that we want? Now, this may seem like a futile question, or maybe one that we claim to not have time to think about, but I believe that the longer you avoid this question, the more you're going to actually be forced to face it eventually, when life finally catches up to you and you realize that you're not even happy with the path that you're on, and you don't even know how you got on it to begin with. In my mind, this is essentially what's at the core of what gets manifested as the so-called midlife crisis, because by that point in life, most people are past the busy hustle period of their life, right? They're usually established in their career, let's say, and they might be in a comfortable spot, or probably something more like a stagnant spot in their career, in their marriage, in their social life, and so on. And so that stagnation, or that kind of dip in high energy, right? They're kind of chilling for a while, and so they end up having the time and space and energy to actually sit back and think, okay, I've been hustling for so long, but is this even really what I want? Is this even the life that I want? Like, how did I end up here, and what's the point? And is this really what's meant for me? Is this who I want to be? Right? And so I think, like I said, you are eventually going to be forced to face this question, whether it is later on in this midlife crisis or on your deathbed someday or otherwise. And so my view on it is, why not face it now on purpose, right? And potentially change the course of your life for the better and for the more meaningful. And so when I think about this question, why do we want the things that we want? I decided to go out and try to find the answer, because I figured there must be something out there. There must be somebody else who's thought about this. And there's only so far that I can get with my own lived experience and my introspective abilities, right? And so what it seems like there's one prevailing theory that answers this question, that seems most convincing to me. And that theory is called mimetic desire. René Girard wrote about this. He was a French philosopher. And I came across a quote of his that I want to share with you. And the quote is, "Man is the creature who does not know what to desire, and he turns to others in order to make up his mind. We desire what others desire because we imitate their desires." So that really got me thinking, because I thought, well, who's to say that those people that we turn to know our desires actually even know what they want? Aren't they also turning to other people to know what they want, who are also turning to other people to know what they want, and so on and so forth? And that domino effect never seems to end, right? Like, who was the first person that made a decision in this whole line of dominoes, right? And so what I would say and what I would propose is that mimesis, which is this act of taking on somebody else's choices, decisions, desires, values, lifestyles, is not the only possible process necessarily. I think there is another way to decide what it is that we want. So it's not the only way, but it is the easiest shortcut to making that kind of a decision. And as a result, it becomes the most commonly used process. However, what I will say is that just because it's the most commonly used process, it doesn't mean that it's ideal for maximum personal growth, right? It's ideal for efficiency maybe, but that efficiency comes at a cost of the fulfillment of your maximum potential. And so that trade-off stuck, evolutionarily speaking, but is it really ideal when it comes to wanting to build a life of meaning and of purpose and of fulfillment? I would argue no. And so, like I said, I do believe there is an alternative. The alternative is to invest your time and energy and efforts into some sort of independent inquiry of what it is that you value, what it is that you want to do with your life, what kind of impact you want to have on the world, on your family, on your children, what kind of legacy you want to leave behind, right? But these are big questions that I'm not sure we're ever encouraged enough to pursue truly, right? You hear people talk about the importance of doing something that you love, or following your heart, or do what makes you happy. But I feel like, and this could just be my own biased opinion, but I feel like we're told that, but the reality of life when we're starting out and deciding what it is that we should be doing, let's say with our career as an example, the reality of that is very different, because on the one hand, we're told do what makes you happy. And on the other hand, we're told, well, this is the job that's going to make you the most money, and that's what you should do. Or this is the job that's most secure, and that's what you should do. And so I think that it takes a lot of courage, first and foremost, but it also takes a lot of time, it takes focus, it takes that introspection, and frankly, it takes an isolation from other sources of influence to be able to actually formulate a vision that is independent of other people's expectations for what your life should be. And nobody likes isolation. That's not a comfortable feeling, right? And I think that by nature, we are not necessarily pleasure seekers or comfort seekers. We're comfort seekers, but I think that comes from a place of pain avoidance more than anything, as a human species. And so that whole process, the whole idea of having to go through all of that, just doesn't seem like the easiest way. And so most people end up not doing that. And so then why do we take the shortcut? Well, because it's easier, because it seems to be the inherent way that even unconsciously we tend to revert to that somehow, because it just has worked for so long. And so even without realizing, we end up doing that. And also because we actually have too many choices to choose from, and it's scary, it's paralyzing, it's overwhelming, and even more so than it used to be. I think that we have more options now to choose from than ever before. Social media and globalization in various ways have opened up so many new possibilities and have removed essentially all limits to our access to information, minus any censorship that might be occurring. This is a side note. We won't get into that. And so that increases our access to options. And now the interesting thing about this is that I feel like when we think about having an increase in options or an increase in choice, we think that that's going to equal an increase in freedom, right? Because there's so many options and we're free to choose any of them. And we think that this is a good thing. And we may even be tempted to think that the more options we have, the better. But this is actually not the case. And I found this really interesting to learn. So there was a psychologist named Barry Schwartz, and he shared a TED Talk years ago talking about this exact phenomenon. And so it turns out that an increase in choice actually leads to paralysis more than it does to liberation. I'll say that again. An increase in choice actually leads to paralysis more than it does to liberation. And I would ask you this: would you consider paralysis to be closer to freedom? Not really. By definition, paralysis means there's less liberation, right? So that sounds very opposite to freedom. And so how is that? How does that work? And Barry actually shared an example of a company, I forget which company it was, but they offered, as part of their retirement plan to their employees, they offered a suite of investment options of mutual funds for their employees to invest in as part of this retirement savings plan. And what they realized was, at first, they wanted to offer them as many options as possible because they thought that was a good thing as well. But then what they realized is the more options that they offered, the lower participation rate they actually saw. And so specifically, for every 10 extra funds or investment options that they offered, they saw 2% less participation from their employees. And so they were really curious about this, and they decided to investigate and wonder, why is it that we're giving them so much more choice? This should be a great thing and they should be wanting to get involved, but all of a sudden they're just kind of backing out and refusing to participate. And it pretty much in a nutshell was because they were overwhelmed with how many options they had, to the point that they just preferred to not even participate because they were afraid of making the wrong choice. So in general, adding more options on any decision you're trying to make increases the expectations that we have of ourselves to make the right choice. And what that does is it increases the potential for disappointment if we make the wrong choice, right? And so the nature of really any choice you make, even if it's just between two things, it's literally impossible to explore every single option to its fullest. And so no matter what decision we make, we end up experiencing some kind of FOMO. And that's just inherently natural with any decision that you're going to make, right? If you choose one thing, that means you said no to the other, and that could have been something and you never are really going to know what that was, okay? And so the more options we have, the more that we feel that, and that ends up leading to a more negative experience. Because if you're perpetually reassessing options instead of ever pursuing one, you end up in this stagnant place. You end up disappointed, and you end up maybe even feeling depressed. And the antidote to that is action of any kind. Action, in this case, it would be making a choice, any choice, right? You are objectively better off to pick the wrong thing, but to make that choice, pick the wrong thing, try it out for a bit, realize it's the wrong thing, learn from it, and then move on to something new. Then you are to sit and try to evaluate until you lose your mind, and then you don't even end up choosing anything. And so part of what Barry was saying as part of his TED Talk is that this action and follow through on a choice objectively actually used to be easier back in the day when there were fewer overall choices to choose from. And he actually shared this comical image that had the caption that said, "Everything was better back in the day when everything was worse." Of course, everything being better meaning it was easier to make a choice, and everything being worse meaning that there were just fewer options to choose from. And so if you feel overwhelmed by the amount of possible choices in front of you, your best chance at success really is to just pick anything, act on it, try it out, and then change course if necessary. And so all in all, in a nutshell, that is the reason why we end up taking shortcuts, is because making a choice is complicated, right? And if you have no guidance, it can be even more stressful, even more complicated, even more lonely maybe, because like I said, there is that element of isolation that's necessary to be able to hone in on what it is that your values actually are and what action you want to take that's going to align with that. It's complicated, it's hard, right? But I do think that making a real decision, so to speak, which is the decision that comes from a place, an informed place, a place of self-awareness, a place of emotional intelligence, a place of intention, because you've thought about what it is that you want to do, and you're coming at it with good information, right? Information that you've gathered about yourself, about your environment, about your options, about your intentions, your motivations, all of that. It's better to make that type of real decision, as I'm calling it, versus what I would call a phantom decision, which is this mimicry that's disguised as your own decision, right? This taking on other people's values, other people's life choices, other people's career moves as your own, right? And that, I think, actually has even more complicated implications than we realize, because although it's easier to just copy somebody else's path, somebody else's behaviors, somebody else's values, I've learned that one of the greatest sources of stress that you could possibly experience is when your words, or I would argue your values, don't match your words, which don't match your actions. So your values, your words, and your actions should all be aligned in order to feel the most at peace, in order to have a consistent brand, in order to have a clear direction in life, in order to be confident, I would think, right? I think all of that kind of comes together as a package when all of those things are aligned. Now, when one of those is not aligned with the rest, I think that's when we experience some of the deepest, most profound levels of stress. And this is not I have too much going on today, too many things on my to-do list kind of stress. This is like an identity crisis type of stress, right? And I think that's why eventually when it catches up to you, it is a hard thing to face, and people don't really know how to manage that, and so they act out in various ways. And so we sort of jokingly say that, oh, well, you've done this crazy thing, you must be going through a midlife crisis. I really do think that that's a real response to a lifetime of phantom decisions. So I think it's worthwhile to go through the process, face the question now, like I said. And so then the next question is, well, how do we do that? And I'm not going to claim to have the perfect answer, but what I would encourage you to do is to start by listing out all of the things that you seem to be pursuing in life. So almost pretend like you're a friend or a colleague or somebody that knows you well looking in on your life. They know enough about you. And what is it that it looks like you're trying to do with your life? What are the things you're engaging with, the types of people you're having friendships, relationships with, the type of career you're pursuing, all these types of things. And next to that, then, each of those things, and as a side note, I do recommend writing this down on paper, unless you can't. If you've got a long commute on the morning road to work, then that's okay. If you can just think about it in the car or on the train, that's fine too. But I would recommend writing it down. So write down all the things that you seem to be pursuing, and next to each of those things, write down where this desire to achieve this thing is coming from. And ask yourself, did you decide that? First of all, does it align with your true values? As a side note, do you even know what your values are? Seems like an easy question to answer. I tried to do this once. I thought, of course I know what my values are, and then I tried to write them down, and it took me 3 to 4 business days to figure it out, because I don't know, it was never something that I actually had to put into words, and it was probably one of the best things I ever did for myself. So side note, figure out what your values are for real, and then as part of this exercise here, figure out if all the things that you're doing actually align with those values, or were you actually influenced externally by somebody else, right? Or were you just going with the flow of what others seem to be doing, or others seem to be convincing you to do? Now, what I want to make clear is there's no shame in whatever your answers end up being. This is really just between you and you, unless you choose to share. All we're trying to do here is we're trying to bring awareness to these things, and we're trying to attend to them without any judgment. Okay, not an exercise in judgment, but an exercise in awareness. We are trying to pay judgment-free attention to our sources of influence. That's all we're looking to do. And even getting this far alone in the exercise, I think, can reveal a lot about our motivations, our habits, how aligned we feel with the life that we're pursuing. And please be honest with yourself. And think about this. There's no right or wrong answer, right? And when you go through this exercise, if you end up feeling aligned with everything, great. If you don't, also great, because it's information, right? At least now you know, and you can do something about it potentially, or at least you can be aware. Maybe now's not the time to do something about it, but at least you're aware of it, and it's something that if an opportunity comes up, you may be able to take action, change course, whatever. And so there is actually more I was hoping to share about this topic of choice, especially as it relates to freedom, because I think that choice and freedom have a very, very interesting connection, a very interesting relationship that I've also recently discovered. But I'm going to tackle that on another episode, as I would like to leave you with that exercise that I just described. I'd like for you to sit with it for now, hopefully try it out. And with that, I would like to thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for listening to this episode of Mindset Over Matter. I really do hope that you found this topic helpful and interesting. And if you did, please feel free to share it with a friend, a colleague, a family member, if you think that they would benefit. And if you have any feedback for me, always open to that as well. So once again, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.